You are also the king of the segue tonight, my friend, because you mentioned Andy Dalton. And no offseason, especially a non-playoff one for the Bengals, would be complete without an Andy Dalton discussion. So Bill Lazor's back. Marvin Lewis is back. I think we all, as we sit here today, Andy Dalton's the guy in 2018. But to me, there's just some underlying things that could make this offseason pretty interesting. Back-to-back losing seasons, granted not his fault, not all his fault. You have now the A.J. McCarron situation, which is very interesting, whether he becomes a restricted free agent or an unrestricted free agent. If he becomes an unrestricted free agent, the Bengals kind of shot themselves in the foot with that whole thing, but whatever. There's that situation. Then there's the situation of a number of quarterbacks coming out in the NFL draft, and the Bengals, I believe, are slated to pick 12th. So with Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold declared today, so that's kind of a little bit of breaking news shortly before the show of USC. Josh Allen of Wyoming. There's potentially Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of guys, and then Baker Mayfield, of course, which a lot of Bengals fans would like. Is part of the rebuild, or is part of one of the concessions or whatever. Do you think Andy Dalton is involved in that, or is 2018 a bridge year where maybe they do draft a guy and they groom him behind Andy, or are they just going to beef up around him like they have not done the past two off seasons and ride with him?
That was probably one of the reasons I was most excited about a new coach, because generally one of the first things coaches do is bring in their own quarterback. So the thought was, hey, if we get this new coach, you're probably more likely to get a new quarterback. And as you mentioned, there's so many supposedly in this draft this year. And until they do things like pro days and senior bowls and combines and all that stuff, we really don't know where they're going to shake out. I think about this time 2 years ago, Carson Wentz wasn't really on a radar. And then he kind of came up out of nowhere. Opinions were mixed on Jared Goff until later in the draft process. And it's kind of the same thing last year with the guys that, how they were going to rank. Mahomes kind of was a late riser, and some of his other folks. So it's really hard to know today. But regardless, it does seem like there's going to be a number of them who would be considered first, second round picks. Whether in 4 months we think they're all franchise guys, or whether we think they're all just solid Andy Dalton types, remains to be seen. But the interesting thing is, I think that they do have to make some sort of decision. Personally, I'd love to see him draft a guy. Put that guy in there, do something with McCarron. You have to trade him, or he's not staying. Either he's leaving as a free agent, or he's leaving this year or next year, some point. There's no reason to keep him around. You can't drag him around forever. And that was the other thing too, is, okay, now you have Lewis. So that pretty much implies Dalton staying. Lewis has said over and over and over again, Dalton's my starter, McCarron's our backup. And that doesn't seem to be changing, unfortunately, because at some point you'd like to see something else happen, but since it isn't, since you pretty much are locked in, Lewis and Dalton are kind of attached to the hip. So you're going to have Dalton as your starter. I'd be very surprised to see that change. You never know, but I'd be really surprised to see that change, and I'd be really surprised to see him draft a quarterback. I'd like to see him do it, especially if there's that many good ones there and one of them falls. I think I'd argue the single most important position on a NFL team is the quarterback, if you can get elite quarterback. Now, if you decide none of them are elite, then if they're just Dalton level, okay, then screw it. There's no reason to reach for one in the first round. But if you determine that, hey, Lamar Jackson, Darnold, Rosen, whoever, we think these 2 or 3 guys are elite and one of them's still there, you absolutely have to take that. Because you can look at, what have guys like Luck and Peyton Manning done for the Colts? When they, when the Colts didn't have one of them, they're just horrible. When they do, they're a totally different team. Aaron Rodgers this year, and I think back in 2009 when he was hurt, their win-loss record of winning with and without him is totally different. The Packers just aren't a good team. You throw Aaron Rodgers on there, and all of a sudden they're a great team. You look at, what Peyton Manning did when he went to Denver. They were a decent team. He got there. They're great. Now they're back to being mediocre again. And you see that with Drew Brees when, the years in New Orleans before him and then after him. And here's some examples of how that elite quarterback totally changes that team. And so if he's there, you have to I'll be on that door. You have to take him, regardless of who you have. Now, if you don't think anyone elite, then okay.
Yeah. So interesting stuff. Carson Palmer played 8 years in Cincinnati. Andy Dalton's entering his 8th year Neither of them won playoff games. Now, you got to give the team credit, and you got to maybe give Marvin Lewis credit. I mean, after what happened in the decade plus after Boomer Esiason, they figured out continuity and productive continuity at quarterback. Now, it didn't add any postseason wins, but essentially they've basically played. John Kitna was 1 year. Carson Palmer started the other 7. Ryan Fitzpatrick took over one of those years from Carson Palmer after he got hurt in a couple of games into that season, that 2008 season, and then Andy Dalton essentially. So, I mean, they've had a pretty solid run of continuity at quarterback under Marvin Lewis. You got to like that. But here's the thing to me, and this plays into, we can kind of make this about Andy Dalton's future, but I also want to make it a little bit about that series we've done about how to fix the Bengals. You got to decide one way or the other. You either need to, at this point, we know who Andy Dalton is. At his best, he's solid to pretty good. I mean, there's the 2015 season and the 2013 season where there was a lot of nice games in there, but at best, he's pretty good. I think the team has let him down specifically on the offensive line and other areas like wide receiver because of free agency attrition the past couple of years. They need to make a concerted decision. On one hand, it's either stick with Andy Dalton, absolutely beef up the offensive line this offseason, maybe get him another receiving tight end threat, re-sign Eifert, whatever that looks like, but surround him with a lot of offensive talent, particularly on the offensive line, to help him out. And we say, maybe if we just absolutely have a beast of an offensive line again, we've got a couple of talented running backs, Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon. You've got AJ Green still. You've got John Ross waiting in the wings. Maybe then you say that's the formula to move on to and through the postseason. The other thing, and it plays to your point, Scott, and this is the way I think, unfortunately, this is going to have to happen because of who they brought back at head coach, who they brought back at offensive coordinator. You are going to need to find, and this is a decision they will have to make, a transcendent type of talent at quarterback. And you will need to find a quarterback, like you said, that could potentially outplay and overcome the shortcomings of the organization, the shortcomings of the coaching staff. And this draft has a lot of guys. Now, everybody has their guy in the quarterback spot this year. Some people hate Sam Darnold. Some people love him. Some people love Josh Rosen. Some people don't like him. Some people like Baker Mayfield. Some people think he's too short. Whatever your thought process is, if you are the Cincinnati Bengals and you think you have a transcendent talent at quarterback sitting in your lap, that might be the route you need to go, that can, as a guy that can elevate, like you mentioned, Peyton Manning elevating the Denver Broncos, Aaron Rodgers elevating the Green Bay Packers, Brett Favre before him. I don't know exactly which is the right route because, like Marvin Lewis, Andy Dalton is a very polarizing player. You like him as a guy. He's productive as a quarterback. He's had a lot of regular season wins, but he hasn't gotten the team there. Then you roll the dice on a quarterback. I just think if you feel you've got a transcendent guy there, maybe you pull the trigger.
When you look at they often claim they are a best player available team. I don't know if they outright say it, but that seems to be the approach they take. So if they truly are, and you have that transcendent quarterback, he is the best player available. So you've absolutely got to take him, be it Darnold or Hill or, Allen or Jackson, whoever it is. If it turns out, and I don't care, if they have Andy Dalton locked up for cheap for 10 years. You look what the Packers did when they had Brett Favre and they drafted Aaron Rodgers. You'd be like, what in the heck are you doing? You already have that transcendent guy, and he's signed for a few more years. He wasn't that old at the time. But they had enough sense to know that, we normally don't draft very well. We don't have good teams. We have this incredible quarterback, and that's the one thing that sustains us. We think this guy's the next one. We have to get him because at some point we're not going to have Favre. Favre's not going to play till he's 50, even though, ESPN
he almost
stories
did.
every week. It's like, Is he going to retire? Is he going to retire? Is he going to retire? Because they're looking for stories, and they kept pushing that, and eventually he did, or he moved on to the Vikings or wherever he went, Jets, and then Rodgers took over, and they've been able to continue that success just based on that one position. So if you think that guy's there, you have to take. If they don't grab that guy, like you said, they have to do everything in their power to get a Dallas Cowboys type of offensive line. Free agency, draft, whatever you can do, because that's what you're going to. Now, I think Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon are good enough. They can make people miss. They can create. But it sure helps if they can do that 5 yards down the field and not 5 yards in the backfield. I mean, that's a big difference if you're, dodging guys to go, make a gain from 5 yards to 10 yards instead of dodging guys just to get to the line of scrimmage. So if you can do that, and if you can give Andy Dalton time, because he's, I think fans have probably grown sick and tired of seeing him just chuck the ball out of bounds whenever he gets any sort of pressure.
Yeah.
It'd be nice because when he doesn't get pressure, he seems to be a fairly decent quarterback. I mean, maybe his deep ball accuracy isn't there, but generally he's going to find an open guy. Generally he's going to make a good throw. He can make throws in tight windows at times if you give him that time. He's not the guy that's going to do that, when he's rushed. When he's rushed, it's like, okay, let me find the guy in, row 3, section 219, just toss it over there. But when he has the time, he generally is a solid quarterback. And so if you can give him any sort of pass protection, and so they have to decide, because you can't do both. You can't use the first round pick and all your free agency money on both. So it's either you're going to build the line like crazy, stick with what you have otherwise, or you go with that next, that guy that's going to be the next, what they wanted Carson Palmer to be.
Yep. And you run the risk there too, because if you throw a rookie quarterback behind an offensive line that we saw from the Cincinnati Bengals this year, all of a sudden you're looking at a David Carr or a different kind of situation there, and you don't want that. But I think this is an appropriate discussion, and I don't want to. I'm not the guy that shoves Andy Dalton out the door, but I think with if you have minimal changes on the coaching staff, and it's the same quarterback, you need to make a very tough business decision. And it's either, hey, we're going to spend a hell of a lot of money in free agency, and we're going to move around in the draft and really surround Andy Dalton with a lot of talent, and we're going to get a coach, an offensive line coach, who can potentially develop Jake Fisher and Cedric Ogbuehi into viable starters. Or you say, hey, got to start it over, even if it's a bridge year for Andy Dalton where he's the starter and a young guy is behind him. Maybe that's the way that they took, and I don't know if that was part of the discussions that took place between Mike Brown and Marvin Lewis, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out and how the A.J. McCarron thing plays out and everything about the quarterback position plays out in the coming draft. We're going to get out of here in just a few minutes. We've got a couple of questions. Hopefully you can stick around, Scott. I know it's late on your end, but if you are new to the program, please join us live every episode. We usually record Wednesday evenings, so please come join us. You can talk with other Bengals fans in our live YouTube chat, or you can watch it on cincyjungle.com. If you can't join us live, we are on SoundCloud and YouTube for downloading, and you can get in touch with the program with comments, questions, anything like that on Twitter at BengalsOBI on Twitter, and the OBinsider at gmail.com via email. Thank you for all of your support.